Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to Author on Author Interviews. My name is Lachlan Perry, and today I'll be talking with two distinguished authors who are among some of the best indie authors that I know of. Their names are David Thomas Kay and Tom Stodulka. Today I'll be talking with them about how their experiences has shaped their writing and given them a better appreciation for life overall. If you guys enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. So guys, how has your personal history inspired your writing? And we'll start with Tom.
Thanks very much, Lachlan. Terrific to be here with you and David. The history is fascinating. I think we've all got a story. We've all got a history. And with my mum and dad having arrived from Europe after living in war-torn Europe for all their lives, till they were in their early 20s. They married in Germany after the war and ended up in Czechoslovakia after they couldn't get into Switzerland because the border was closed the day they tried to get into Switzerland. So there's all of that history. They ended up in Naples as refugees, displaced persons, where my brother was born, and then 2 years later came to Australia on an American troop carrier and landed in Sydney and went straight out to the refugee camp in Bathurst where I was born. So you can't really ever get away from that history. And yeah. I mean, sometimes people say, and the rest is history. And it's a bit like that with that influence of my parents' background, and just starting to write the memoir. And the first part of my memoir relates to my mum and dad's early years in Europe and then in Australia in the late 40s, early 50s.
Awesome, Tom. I really think that it's something always that inspires the imagination is what happened during World War II. And also the aftermath of that is just, there's so much that's happening around that time. And I think, David, your story is a little bit similar about what inspired you when you were growing up in England. Is that right? Was what happened in England, did that inspire you?
I was always inspired anyway by wondering where we came from.
Yeah.
As there's always one in the family who wants to know where they came from. And I often ask my mother, and she'd say, "Oh, from Scotland."
Yeah.
Called Johnstone, so it must be from Scotland. But later on, when I was doing genealogy, I believed that. Later on, when I was doing genealogy, I discovered that it was nothing like that at all. I used to go out with my grandfather, cockling and winkling and longline fishing on Runhead, and I later discovered that we weren't Johnstone, we were Johnson, and we didn't come from Scotland. We came from just around the corner in the Lake District.
Oh, true.
That's with my research. And I was on the island where the Vikings landed. Further got into it, and then it was at the time where the DNA was, and I found out my mother had DNA from South Norway, and it all clicked together. That's where the Vikings came from, down the west coast of England. The east coast was Danish people. The Norwegians came down the west coast, Isle of Man, Barrow. So, and they actually fished in the estuary there the same way as my grandfather was fishing. Exactly the same way, and he taught me how to fish there. I used to come home from the merchant navy and knock on his window 5 in the morning. We're going fishing. We'll pick up some worms, and we're off. Yeah. We're off and set the long lines out and dig up ropes, exactly like the Vikings done 900 years earlier. He was a descendant of the Vikings.
Awesome.
So I wrote a blog about that on my webpage about him in particular, Thomas Johnson. And Thomas Johnson, it wasn't because of my grandfather, he was my grandfather. I researched right back, and there was half a dozen Thomas Johnsons going way back.
Yeah.
So Thomas Johnson became my protagonist throughout all my novels. Made up, fictionalized, but doing similar things as what I'd discovered in my research. Like one was a forgeman in Coniston, in the Lake District, that sort of thing. And I discovered in the chapels, went back to 1440, Johnson, which is Jansen. It was Jansen.
Yeah.
And they softened to Johnson and Johnston. They moved to Whitehaven up north, Workington, shipbuilding. The work took them elsewhere.
Yeah.
They stopped being sheep farmers in 1500.
Yeah.
He became a forgeman in 1660, I think it was. That was the first breakaway from being, they used to work for the monastery, the monks in the monastery. Everybody did in the Furness area, Furness district. And he was the first to break away, Thomas Johnson. He became a Quaker.
Yeah.
Funded him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I started fictionalizing, and I took him to the States and back, and I wrote about the Quakers, because we were early Quakers. So I was actually writing about what we were.
Yeah.
It was all fictionalized and fantasized.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like I should have been taught at school.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
I love your timeline, David. It's it fits together so well, and it's definitely like something like there's so much like TV shows and ideas and stuff that can come just from that history alone. So guys, is there people or family members that have inspired your writing? People that from your past, like a grandfather or grandmother?
No, I'd say my mother taught me, used to read to me a lot when I was a child, and I lost her for 2 years when I was 4 years old.
Yeah.
She had tuberculosis and had to go to hospital for 18 months. So I was brought up by my nana and my granddad, who have just been taught me fishing. So, and I could read and write by that time. I was 4 years old. I was 4.5 actually. And when I went to school, they had me reading out. She taught me to read properly, so she was a good teacher that way, you know.
Yeah.
Other than that, what that side of the family did inspire me. My grandfather, talking about, he was always fishing through the poverty years. He'd come home with a lobster, a crab, or winkle, but he fed the family, and also he would go around the fields and pick up mushrooms and catch a rabbit. So he inspired me. To me, in my mind, he was a Viking. You know? Yeah,
definitely.
He kept the food on the table throughout the war years. It was really hard to get food. Food rationing. So he fed us well. You know? So he was a big inspiration for me. My father was busy working. He's travelling to Wales to see my mother in hospital a lot. So he was taken care of. So I didn't get back into the family until I was maybe 7 years old. To my family. Then we went from there. The early inspirations was when I was 6 years old, I'd say. Yeah, and the formation years. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome, David. I can't even remember when I was 4 to 7, to be honest.
Right. Well, there was bombs dropping all over the place. It was 1940, 1941.
Yeah.
Bombs dropping all over the place. Yeah.
Awesome.
Pretty hectic. Yeah. And easy to remember.
Yeah, so definitely got the history to remember. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, it reminds me of the saying about a child needs a whole village to help them evolve and develop. And certainly my parents were very influential, and then a whole lot of other people were influential as well, including my grandmother. My mum and dad brought my grandmother and my aunt out to Australia shortly after they landed in Bathurst in the refugee camp. Dad, being an artist, being a creative, he was singled out by the Good Neighbour Council to exhibit his works and promote Eastern European art in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. And when they left the refugee camp, they established themselves in Sydney and rented first, and then were able to buy a humble cottage out Parramatta Way in North Rocks. And Mum and Dad were very big on trying to help us get a good education. That was very significant for them as newcomers in Australia. I guess they were looking at trying to create an environment that was better than what they had in Europe.
Yeah.
And so we had quite a lot of cottage industries going on at home, and I was very much a part of that, part of that creativity, if you like, of my dad being an artist in Australia for altogether for about 60 years in Sydney and Canberra. And life was very hectic because Dad was running a nursery, cacti and succulents, and we had chooks and ducks and geese. My grandmother had come from a farm in Bavaria and was very keen on having some of those farming activities, even on a suburban block out in Parramatta. One of the neighbours turned around and said, "Look, you really need another block of land to do all of this farming stuff." So we were fortunate to be able to have some extra land. But my grandmother was working for the Red Cross. She was a nurse in Germany, and ended up travelling all around New South Wales, finding work, looking after as a housekeeper and as a nurse in aged care facilities.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, she was often back in Sydney with us as well. And she was very influential, especially in an environment where Mum and Dad didn't have that much time for my brother and myself. We were sent to a very good school, but that was a team effort. My parents and grandmother had to work very hard for that private school to be, for the fees to be paid.
Yeah.
And so those influences are quite enormous. But you know, it's not only family then. We had a lot of people who would visit the house looking at Dad's artwork and buying Dad's artwork over the years. And I was exposed to people other than my parents and my grandmother constantly. And I think that there was that need for my mother particularly to make sure that we wouldn't go under, that you know, through Dad's artwork, and Mum was a dental technician and ran a practice from home, and with the support of my grandmother, we were I guess thrown into an environment where people played such a significant role. So it's through my parents. But then, funnily enough, I couldn't write any of or many of my assignments at prep school, and my mum helped me write the essays. And Mum was German, and Dad was Czech, and yet she always had a passion for languages. So maybe I just had a lazy brain and not much confidence. And I was very pleased that she helped me with my assignments, despite her being so busy. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't start writing till poetry till the mid-70s. I wrote my first poem on board HMS Duchess when I was in the Navy, first up as a legal officer doing my orientation. And on the way back from Suva, Vila Mackay and Townsville, I wrote that first poem, and then didn't write again for about 30 years. So it's funny how there are twists and turns in our lives.
Yeah, definitely.
And then people come along and give you the confidence as the years go on, and the inspiration, whether it's through Linda Henderson, who introduced me to Ocean Reeve. And so the story goes on. And as I said at the beginning, the rest is history.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Awesome,
Lachlan.
guys. I'm loving this. So I've lost my question. With your both of you, with your backgrounds from Europe and Australia, how have Australian or European people inspired your writing?
You want to go first on this one, Dave?
That's a tricky one because
Maybe I'll jump in. I'll
the only
jump
thing
in.
that's
Dave. No,
inspired
you're
Have a think about it, David.
the only thing that's inspired my writing is the past. Of course, I'm always looking at people as they pass, and I study people and the mannerisms and speech, and my characters develop from nowhere, but obviously from observation. But that's just from the people around me on my travels. I was in the Navy, so the memories. I've been to most countries in the world in the Navy. So I was not. I don't believe I was. Well, I must have been influenced by them. But I can't pinpoint anything. It's just a general thing. It's when I write a character, they just pop into my head.
That's right.
It's like magic. I sometimes don't know where they come from. There must be some link somewhere from just living. But nothing. I can't pinpoint any particular point or person. I've never said, oh, I'm going to write about that person. He's I've never done that at all. They just form in my mind as I go, what's required of that protagonist develop, and it just happens. It's not designed on anybody, so but it's probably influenced by the environment I've been living in.
Yeah, that is right. So how do you think
I've lived in a lot of different environments.
So how do you think the environment has impacted your writing, David?
The environment, well, I write about Norway and England. I was shortly writing about Australia. The environment of the Lake District definitely. I hope it comes out in my novels, my descriptions of the Lake District, the environment. It's a peaceful place, but sometimes bad things happen.
That's right. Oh, it's
my novels
history over there.
But it's on a background of peace, and I just love. I love castles. I love monasteries. So I was obviously influenced by. I lived around the corner from Furness Abbey, so it's a walking distance.
Oh,
Furness Abbey, which is the main part of one of my novels, comes through. So, and I was always interested in a castle. There's a castle, but I was interested in that sort of thing in the history and people who inhabited those castles, kings and queens. I always studied the environment they lived in. The people lived in under those kings and queens. So that's the environment, not that I lived in, but that I imagined and read about. Going back, because I write from 1800 to for 300 years from 1850. So 1,000 years. I'm writing over a time span of 1,000 years. So I have to study all that history going through. I lived in where it all happened, in the Lake District and London. I've lived all around those places. So you pick up the environment there, even though it's 500 years later.
That's right.
You still got the castles and the galleries. You just get a feeling for the place the way it was, and when you read about the people and how they lived, only the modes of dress changed. Nothing else. The food usually stayed the same. That's right. The modes of dress and the music have changed. Really.
That's right. Music's definitely changed.
That's right.
How about you, Tom? How have people or the environments of Australia and Europe inspired?
Absolutely. There's such good questions, Lachlan. Before COVID, I was traveling all around Australia with my work as a mediator. And that gave me so many opportunities, whether you're in a restaurant, coffee shop, or just driving from Sunshine Coast up to Toowoomba, fire-esque, and capturing what you see right in front of you. It is very realistic. It's harsh. The bushfires, the floods, are all captured in my 3 books of poetry. And the last one was actually for the COVID years, Life is a Drama, Be Calmer. The one before that, Life is a Dance, and the one before that, Storm Clouds and Silver Linings, My Journey. And every one of them actually picks up on, reactions and observations about nature, about people, about, flora and fauna. And one of the poems, I'll just read a few lines from, Woman in a Brisbane Restaurant, that was written in 2018. Back to the lady alone as she sat under an eclectic piece of Art Deco kitsch, a red wine to ease a sense of being alone, a hint too of sadness in her eyes, her legs crossed, prim, neat, serene in her deep reverie and reflection, beautiful haute couture, straight back, elegant, a woman of class and style. Statistics tell us there are an increasing number of those in our world totally alone, almost as if abandoned in the rush, driven by a less friendly and caring world. Loneliness cuts deep and deeper, this time of year particularly. She is now staring out the window, seemingly into nothingness, though her stare suggests she is thinking, calm in her reflection. And so it goes on. That's just an example. And also about Willy Wagtail. The Willy Wagtail features in about 4 of my poems across the 3 books. And each time there's a Willy Wagtail, whether it's down in Brisbane or down in Byron Bay or in Sydney or up in Landsborough. So 4 Willy Wagtail poems. And I treat that as the same Willy Wagtail that follows me all around the countryside, and just to reflect on that bird, and as if that bird's there sharing my work, sharing my experiences, sharing my interests and my observations. So we work together in that capacity.
That's awesome.
So they're just examples of the sort of things
They all sing the same song.
Sorry, David?
They all sing the same song.
They do. And funnily enough, now that we've moved again, this time up to Karoi, it's called Black Mountain. And ever since I've been here, which is only 2 months, Willy Wagtails are not just 1 and 2, they're everywhere. So they've all come together up here. And yet I still haven't written about them as yet, despite having been here for 2 months. And of course, with the floods and the whole mountain came down just near where we live. So we can't go back south, the most direct route. We've got to go about 50 kilometers on a round journey to cope with the problem of the floods. So, the fires were catastrophic. The floods have been catastrophic, and plenty of themes and recurring themes to write about in what is really a very harsh land in many ways. It's a tough land, and people are so resilient, and the farmers are so resilient. Now with the bee problem around Newcastle, with the varroa mite, the impact on nature, whether it's through climate, whether it's through floods and fires, but now there's also these issues with things like the varroa mite. That's just one of the impacts on farming in Australia in the last few weeks even, and yet the farmers keep going. I mean, that level of resilience is just something fantastic. And so the farmers feature in my poems as well.
Yeah, that's great. Very good, Tom. Yeah, hit it on the spot. That's definitely everything I wanted to hear. That's awesome. So guys, what has inspired you to come back to writing after being away from it for so long?
Well, I was away for 6 years. My wife was hospitalised. I lost my wife. So I didn't write for 6 years. I lost her now 3 years ago, and it's taken me that long to get back into writing because it's always been there.
Yeah.
It's always been in my head.
Yeah.
But, I had to drop it because I had other duties to do. I had to look after my wife for 8 years.
Yeah.
And everything else went by the boards, so there was no choice.
Yeah.
You couldn't write a letter, nothing.
Mm.
So it's taken me. I've been writing now maybe a year, so it took me 2 years. And being a member of the Writers Association helps me a lot because I was talking to people like yourself, people who talk the same language. So it inspired me to write again. I wasn't sure I was going to, but I had lots of things in my head that I'd carried for a long time.
Yeah.
And I suppose they had to come out, but I couldn't. It wasn't working.
Yeah.
So just being around people like yourself, Tom, it's inspired me, it's dragged it out of me again. I find myself writing just small assignments to start with, and then I started filling in my original books and I republished them. And the third one, and now I'm right into it now. The third one, I decided to add 15,000 words to it and then introduce a new character.
Oh, awesome!
So I knew I was back, and that's it was always. I was never happy with the third book. I had it published as an ebook. I was never happy with it because it was done under strenuous circumstances.
Yeah.
So I was always going to come back to it.
Yeah.
I changed the title to The Secret Child, and added an extra character, and it's all based on poetry in a way, because we took a holiday while my wife was still au fait. She's okay to talk to. The family went on a holiday to the Lake District in Keswick, and we stayed in the House of Poets. That was Robert Southey and William Wordsworth and a whole lot. William Scott. They all went there, and we stayed for 4 nights there in the lounge, and I read novels. And I got the feeling of Keswick and Greta Hall. It's called Greta Hall. That's the house that's Southey, the old leased, all the poets.
Yeah.
Big family. But you read about it in the book. It's all in the novel. So that was a good experience. But also, I came across Appleby Castle. That's not far from Penrith. It's all and Keswick. It's all around the same area. My 50% of my book is located in Appleby Castle, and it's like an upstairs, downstairs. It's a maid, chief maid, and rich people mixed in with rich people, and the scandals and things like that. You know, and so that all comes together, and also pops down to London for the Crystal Palace. It's 1850. So I know my memorable characters from the first book are reincarnated.
Yeah.
Coming back as certain people because I like them. A lot of people say, "Why did you kill them off?" What? I liked him. I liked her. So this was playing on my mind during the second novel I was writing, and I decided to reincarnate them in the third novel. Yeah. So I was always thinking ahead.
Yeah.
What they were going to be. You know, there's a gypsy. It can be a gypsy in the third book.
Yeah.
There's necromancers and gypsy folklore, and it was all coming back to me. It was flowing again. You know? So that's real good, and I really enjoyed redoing this third novel. Yeah, and,
that's great.
The title was always a mystery, so it's going to be called a mystery. It's the Secret Child. It's because there's a lot of crossbreeding and all sorts going on. They're hard to. It's a tricky one to put together. A lot of cross pots, things like that. Very tricky to put together, but enjoyable. And I hope the readers enjoy it as much. I think they will. Yeah. And at the end, it leads on to Thomas Johnson follows through, and he's going to Australia as a convict.
And that's book 4.
That's book 4. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's called, I think it's called The Outback Messenger, actually.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So how about you, Tom? How has
it's funny how we're
inspired you to come back to writing?
It's funny how we're all neck and neck, isn't it? We had those gaps and influenced by so many things and by people and places. And, you know, I said before about the 30-year break, which is a bit scary, but life gets busy. And I was traveling all around the countryside when I was in the Navy and had different postings around Australia, and then worked up in the Northern Territory for 5 years. And that took me to quite a few communities up there and in the Northern Territory and across Northern Australia. And then now in Queensland for 20 years as still doing my mediation work. So I actually write about mediation and some of the matters, which of course one can't give any great detail about because the nature of mediation is all about confidentiality, but just general themes come up. And I should give credit as well to people like Linda Henderson, who used to run a little bookshop in Butterham called Autumn Leaves. She introduced me to, she was running classes and I went along to a few one-on-one classes with Linda just to, she'd give you homework and you'd have to write a bit of an essay and then it wasn't long and she introduced me to Ocean Reeve from Ocean Reeve Publishing and Jason Smith. And so that took things to that next level of, I guess I was already writing some poems by that time, but never thought, you know, we could actually put them into a book. I mean, that was just so way out. And so just on scraps of paper, these poems existed, and all of a sudden there were enough to submit to a publisher, to submit to Ocean, and he picked most of the ones I submitted. And so again, you know, the rest is history, so to speak. And then Ocean said after my 3rd book, you better write your memoir now, Tom. And I thought that's a bit rich, you know, that's extra pressure on me that I don't need, and I wouldn't be able to do it anyway. But then because somebody gives you that little push, that inspiration and that support, and then you link in with people like yourself, Lachlan, and now David, and with Facebook, where, you know, we're always in close communication with each other, with other writers and their experiences. And you talked before about your grandmother being from the Torres Strait, and you know, those themes also in relation to culture. And that really related to that earlier question about our Europeanness and our Australianness. And when I think of my dad painting those Australian scenes, the bush scenes, the country scenes around Bathurst and Moss Vale and Cooma and Jindabyne and Canberra. And, you know, he had come from a completely different Sound of Music environment to an Australian, so much harsher land, so much harsher environment, where things aren't green unless you're in a time like we're in now, where the floods are everywhere. And after 10 years of droughts, you know, we've got, and bushfires, we've got all this green grass everywhere. It's almost too much now. But in relation to the Indigenous theme, I wrote a poem in 2015 and I called it A Smashed Face. And it was about an Indigenous person reconnecting with his children after a period in jail. I've said here, years of struggle, a different culture, free and wild, but within their own rules, protocols and instructions, strict adherence to nature, in a world of the free spirit where rivers ran, where the skies were full of stars and wonderment, where the moon came and went, where the heat followed the cold and the cold followed the sun. How can someone used to the dreaming, the boomerang and the kangaroo come to terms with a modern world full of contradictions, adherence to the norm, and severe Western punishment where the white man's rules were broken? And then I go on, I better not read it all. The loss of family and children, too many painful reminders a face begging for forgiveness, sometimes granted, other times denied forever. Can you really make a new beginning and give things a fresh start, if not too down at heart? Look up to the sun and over to the moon. Let the rainbow and the serpent, the crocodile, the kangaroo, and the ancestral spirits all, let them all guide you and help you to find that something brand new.
That's great, Tom. I love that.
Thanks, Lachlan.
That's all.
So
I think we've sort of covered the bases, haven't we?
Tom, where did you work in the Northern Territory, Tom?
I lived in Darwin,
Right.
just at Fanny Bay, up from the museum, and travelled all around Tennant Creek, Hermansburg, Alice Springs, Yuendamu, and Maningrida, Port Keats, Wadeye. And of course, Wadeye is now going through a really bad time with a lot of disruption, a lot of conflict, and sadly, tragedy all around. And it's something that Australia, or the people living in those very stressful environments where culturally there are so many challenges, and so many challenges, just day-to-day issues such as housing, for example, and 15 people living in one house, and all of those situations makes those environments extremely, extremely difficult. But I loved the years I had in the Northern Territory and spent a lot of time in the communities despite those difficult issues, which I think are getting increasingly more complex.
Was it Arnhem Land, did you? Went to Arnhem Land?
Arnhem Land, yep,
Yes.
absolutely. And out to Kakadu and down to Litchfield National Park and Bachelor, a place called Bachelor. And beautiful sounding name down in a community not that far from Alice Springs, Utopia and Hermansburg. And we were on different programs and projects and dealing with issues of conflict. For example, in Alice Springs, there was a taxi dispute issue. In other communities, we were dealing with the consumer issues, such as community stores, where the prices of produce, of goods, is very, very expensive, and just by the nature of things. And we were able to identify or establish some protocols through some of the federal government agencies, ACCC and the Banking Ombudsman and Consumer Affairs organisations, to at least make things a little bit better. You can only sometimes reduce the challenges, the problems, through goodwill. It doesn't always work. But I was the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner at the time, and we were able to, in our small way, make a difference to people's lives. But of course, there's Ayers Rock, Uluru, and the most magnificent, you'll never forget that experience of coming across the bit of a hill and all of a sudden in front of you is Ayers Rock, or Uluru. And I don't know if you've been there, Lachlan or David.
I haven't.
But,
I've been to all those places you mentioned.
they're pretty amazing.
My longest poem was Cape York.
Right.
We went around 2 weeks, we were visiting all the Aboriginal communities up there.
Yep.
And it was with a religious group, Church of God or something, Church of God, something, a religious group. We hooked onto them, no idea. So it was a dry trip. You know? We just drove camping all the way around Cape York. It's very interesting, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, just doing it the hard way with tents, and that was really good experience. That's when I first retired. And I also worked in Northwest Cape on Coolan Island. I never saw an Aborigine. There weren't any around there. It's an island of iron ore. It was.
Yeah, we've got one country, but there are very many variations across Australia. I think it's a positive thing that we have more people leaving the cities now for a whole range of reasons,
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and moving into regional and rural
that's a
Australia.
good thing. Yeah, good thing.
And that's healthy. And also the grey nomads travelling around the countryside, learning a little bit more about Australia that they'd never had the opportunity to do, because
Yeah.
people in Australia so often go to Bali or go to Europe or
That's
go
right.
to New Zealand. You know, the whole cultural thing
Never see the outback. Huh?
is in so never seen the outback or never really got to experience living with people from different cultures, from indigenous cultures, from other cultures within Australia. There's such a diversity of that, and we're really going through some interesting times now that will need a lot of goodwill.
Yeah, that's right.
There are those issues that I was talking about in Port Keith, Wadeye, just west of Darwin, and that many attempts have been made by different governments over the years, and also being made within the communities themselves. But a lot of people are acknowledging that we still haven't got the answer right.
Yeah.
There was a book written in the Northern Territory, Why Warriors Lay Down and Die, by Trudgeon, and it really traces that whole issue of coming to terms with a Western culture, but also trying to live a more ancient traditional culture. And how do you reconcile those clashes? And I think when my parents came from Europe with their European culture, that was also a challenge. But even though it was very tough, I don't think it's anywhere near as tough as living in some of the remote communities and young people wanting to live a more westernized life, and being exposed to a whole range of dramas, problems, the drinking issues, the drug issues, which affect the whole community in Australia.
That's right.
But are being managed in different ways, with sometimes more success than others, and other times no success at all. So we really have to, I think, work harder as a community to reconcile those differences, but also still recognise that we're part of one country, many cultures.
That's awesome, Tom. That's definitely wrapping up the history of Australia and tracing back your guys' histories. It's definitely you brought a lot to the table. I have to say it's definitely quite a interesting topic, bringing history into mind, but also with an outlook of what Australia is like at the moment, and definitely what you've been saying, Tom. It's relevant, and it's something that we can't forget about. And also when we're writing, it's also something to keep in the back of our minds. It's always something to write about, because writing, as you know, it's about change. It's about how we develop, and definitely I think as we progress, what we write about is what changes things. Words are a lot more powerful than swords. And I think, yeah, definitely. I love what you guys say, but just to cap it off, coming back to writing after such a long time, having a break for such a long time, would you guys ever give up writing now?
No, it'd have to be an extreme circumstance, like I went through before with losing a wife. But no, I can't see anything stopping me anymore because I've got too many projects in my mind. It's the book's a series, and I was going to end it on the 4th. No, I'm not so sure it's going to end on the 4th, because You have other ideas that keep popping into your head. You always look ahead.
Yeah.
You always look ahead. Huh?
Yeah.
And behind you a bit probably, but mainly ahead. Where you're going.
Yeah.
You have to lay the foundation just in case you go there. Huh?
Yeah. That's right.
Just in case. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leave 4 or 5 threads that you might use.
Yeah.
Yeah. You may not use any of them, but at least you're thinking ahead and everything's a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Awesome, David. How about you, Tom?
Well, I think as well, I heard what David said, and it's very tough to have lost your nearest and dearest, David. I've been fortunate that I've had a family who's supported me in a quite, when I write a new poem, I'll send it to my wife, Janet, and the 3 kids. And, sometimes they'll send a lovely response. Other times they won't send a response at all. And, but nevertheless, it's sort of like that silent support that you really can be invaluable as well. And I've got to acknowledge that in no uncertain terms, to have that support, because being able to write is a lovely thing. And it's almost, part of our lives, no matter how busy we are. But then there's that extra step up. Can you actually have your work published? And just the connectedness of going to that next level.
Yeah.
I encourage people, and I've referred quite a few people to Ocean, that if at all possible, if they can get their work published, that's a really important part of it for your own equilibrium, for your own, feeling good. Because, as a creative, as a writer, I mean, I don't consider myself as anything special on that level. However, I know the satisfaction I get by receiving reviews and endorsements, and they come in from all around the world, and then I'll include some of those endorsements and some of those reviews in my books, and you're just blown away by it, and you think, how's this possible, just through some simple words, albeit they're inspired words and they're words of coming from the heart. But then for people as well to say, wow, that's fantastic, you've really made my day. And that's enormously encouraging and rewarding to keep writing no matter what.
That's awesome, Tom. And also the flip side of writing is writing continues on after you die. Your writing will still be around if it is published. If you stick everything you've written into a drawer and you never get it published, you won't have people reading much of your work after you pass on. But the thought of having something that you've written continuing after you die, it's almost like, you've got another child out in the world. It's always going to be growing. There's always something else happening that you've done. And I think that's something very comforting about writing. It's if you can get it published, and if it's out in some sort of system, you're almost, you're giving it a new life for yourself. And I think it's
satisfying.
Therapeutic thought, I think.
Lachlan, that just reminds me of the 2 Poets with Passion sessions we've had down in Mount Gravatt, Jen Compton and myself. Jen Compton wrote a book of poems called Life's a Mango, and she thought, why don't we get together as a few poets and present? So we've done that twice now, and on the last occasion we had an invited poet along. David, we'll have to invite you along to recite some of your poems at the next Poets with Passion sometime later this year, hopefully. And the first time we had Hayden Parsons, who's an Ocean Reef published poet, and last time was Steve Lloyd Boundy as an invited poet. And it'll be fantastic to keep that going. And you meet some of the most amazing authors along the way through that.
That's definitely
And David, meeting you tonight properly rather than just on Facebook, and continuing with you, Lachlan, with your youth, your inspiration, your enthusiasm, and your encouragement, and knowing that your book's just about to come out. You better tell us what the name of the book is.
Yes.
The Resolution.
The Resolution. Wow, that's very mediation oriented.
Yeah, exactly. It's got a meaning to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I probably should round off the interview now, fellas. It's been awesome talking to you both, and definitely everything we've covered is very interesting, and there's a lot more we could go on about, but obviously with time, I should wrap it up now. But it was great meeting you. For the people watching this video or who have been listening to this, I'll attach the links to both David and Thomas's profiles. So you can check out all of their poetry and also all of their books. But yeah, make sure to check us out. These two writers are very interesting guys, and they've also written very good material. So I encourage anyone listening to this or watching this video to check out their works. But thank you for your time, and I'll see anyone who's watching this around. Catch you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much, Lachlan.